Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're diving into one of the most interesting and really under-discussed moments in American history, the business plot of 1933. This was a conspiracy that could have transformed the United States from a chaotic democracy into a more nationalist republic. We're talking about a group of powerful businessmen who allegedly plotted to overthrow the then President Franklin D. Roosevelt and install a regime modeled on the nationalist states that were growing in Europe. In this video, we'll uncover the plot's origins, the key players, including a surprising connection to Prescott Bush, the grandfather of President George W. Bush, the evidence, why it failed, and how close America came to a radical change. Let's get started. To set the stage, we need to understand the chaos of 1933. The Great Depression was crushing America utterly. The stock market crash of 1929 had wiped out fortunes, and by 1933, the unemployment rate hit 25%. That's a whole quarter. Banks were collapsing, farms were foreclosing, and millions were homeless or starving. Faith in capitalism and the government was crumbling. Herbert Hoover's administration seemed utterly helpless. And traditional ideas were gaining a lot of ground. Socialism on the left, fascism on the right. Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected in a contested landslide in 1932, and he promised the New Deal to help rebuild the economy with government expansion programs, bank regulations, and very high taxes. To America's business elite, this was a betrayal. They saw FDR's policies as a slide towards socialism and a prelude to war with their European kinsmen, possibly reigniting another world war, which no one really wanted. This fear among the titans of industry created a fertile ground for the business plot. They weren't just worried about losing their money. They believed the entire system of free enterprise in America was at stake. The business plot was their plan to seize control and reshape America on their terms. Now, let's meet the key players. The plot allegedly involved some of America's wealthiest men: Irene DuPont of the DuPont Chemical Empire, J. Howard Pugh of Sun Oil, and executives from General Motors and Remington Arms. Another big player is J.P. Morgan Jr., and another Wall Street giant that we'll get into a bit later. These were the powerhouses of American industry, men with the resources to bend history to their will. But they needed a leader with military credibility to rally the masses. Their mistake was turning to Major General Smedley Butler. He was a retired Marine Corps hero with 2 Medals of Honor and a massive following among veterans. Butler had led the Bonus Army in 1932. Now let's explain the Bonus Army real quick. After the First World War had ended, all the soldiers that fought in World War I were promised their pay and a bonus at the end of the war. Neither of these things came. So, in protest, 43,000 veterans marched on Washington and peacefully protest. This is an old-timey, ye-old photograph from what their camp looked like. Those were all their tents. It was orderly, right on the side of the Potomac. You can see the river there. They were peacefully protesting. They wanted the money they had fought for, their pay, their bonuses that had not been given to them by the government. This is another image of that. It wasn't just the veterans either. It was people. Tons of citizens joined in saying, no pay, no stay, or no pay, all stay, as you can see over there. It was a big deal. And ultimately, Herbert Hoover got Douglas MacArthur to violently seize them and send them out. And a lot of people died, civilians and soldiers, as they were violently expelled from the Capitol. Now, Butler was the one who led this bonus army. He had not necessarily created it, but he was the figurehead. He gave speeches. He was the fire behind it. So he had a lot of respect at that time. The plotters thought that Butler was their man to lead the coup. The go-between was a man named Gerald C. McGuire, a bond salesman and American Legion member with ties to Wall Street. McGuire approached Butler in 1933. Pitching a plan to mobilize veterans and overthrow FDR. But Butler, who would criticize democracy and communism in his books and in speeches, was really not really not willing to risk any skin in the game, so to speak. So he played along, but lied to the plotters, and in exchange, secretly gathered evidence to expose the scheme. These players set the stage for the plot that could have changed America forever. The central figure of the business plot, though a bit controversial, is Prescott Bush. Yes, that's the father of George H.W. Bush, one of our presidents, and the grandfather of more recent president George W. Bush. Prescott at this time was a rising star in finance during the 1930s. He was a partner at Brown Brothers Harriman, a very powerful Wall Street investment bank. He was also the director of the Union Banking Corporation, which managed assets for German industrialists, including Fritz Thyssen, a known supporter of the National Socialist regime in Germany at that time. Declassified documents from the 1940s show that Union Bank's assets were seized under the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1942, raising a lot of questions about Prescott's ties to National Socialist interests. Prescott Bush was chief among the financiers backing the coup, drawn by his connections to Wall Street and anti-FDR sentiment. But let's dive into the plot itself, as revealed by Smedley Butler. McGuire first contacted Butler in the summer of 1933, offering $18,000 to deliver a speech at an American Legion convention, pushing for a return to the gold standard, which was the point of this convention, a policy dear to the wealthy to protect their assets from inflation, and really everybody else. Just to go into that briefly, so for a long time, until the 1960s, America was on what was called the gold standard, meaning that gold was the global reserve currency of the West, of the European nations. And the USD and other paper dollars, other fiat currency, was tied to physical gold. And at that time, if you wanted to, you could actually take your money to a bank and exchange it for gold bullion. And you've all heard of Fort Knox, comparing stuff to Fort Knox, right? Fort Knox is where they kept the gold physically, a large portion of it. So at this time, money, currency, was backed by a tangible, physical, valuable asset. And that kind of anchored the M1 monetary supply to something real and of value. And we were taken off the gold standard, meaning that the money wasn't really backed by anything, which allowed the Federal Reserve to just print as much money as possible. The creation of the Federal Reserve goes back to stuff that happened with the Titanic and some other stuff going on, but that's kind of out of the scope for today. But the gold standard was a big thing for the American Legion and the business plotters. Butler refused to give this speech, sensing something off, he later said. Over the next year, McGuire revealed more, that a group of businessmen had $3 million ready to fund a veterans organization, inspired by the French Corps des Filles, a far-right organization that mobilized ex-soldiers. The plan was to recruit 500,000 veterans, arm them, and then march on Washington to pressure FDR into appointing a Secretary of General Affairs, who would effectively run the government, reducing the president to a bit of a figurehead. If FDR resisted, force was on the table, possibly even assassination. McGuire himself boasted of studying Mussolini's black shirts, Hitler's brown shirts, and the Croix de Feu, claiming these models could work in America. He showed Butler a bank account with $3 million and mentioned the trips he had made to Europe, funded by men like Robert Sterling Clark. The veterans would be paid $1 a day to keep them loyal. The plotters envisioned a National Socialist-style regime, with Butler as the public face, though the real power would stay with the businessmen themselves. This was no small scheme. It was a calculated attempt to overhaul America's government, turning it into a state that existed for the benefit of the citizens. The plot unraveled ultimately when Butler decided to act. Now, Butler had no love for FDR's New Deal, but he had no stomach for a true coup d'etat either. He documented every meeting with McGuire, even enlisting a journalist named Paul Comfy French to pose as his associate and witness the conversations. French later confirmed all of Butler's accounts, detailing McGuire's European trips and the plot's National Socialist inspirations. In November 1934, Butler testified before the McCormick-Dickinson Committee, a congressional panel investigating fascist and communist activities. He laid out the entire scheme, the $3 million fraud, the plan to arm veterans, the European models, and names like JP Morgan, Prescott Bush, and some of the other large players. When subpoenaed, they all denied the coup, but admitted to discussing a veterans group. Clark later confirmed funding McGuire's trips, but claimed it was for research, not any type of coup d'etat. The committee's 1935 report was explosive, yet cautious. It confirmed evidence of a plot to establish a National Socialist organization, but didn't name major players like DuPont or Bush, citing limited subpoena power. Critics, including Butler himself, argued that the report had been softened up due to pressure from the elite. This moment was a near miss for the status quo. If Butler hadn't spoken up, the March on Washington might have succeeded, installing a regime that would have reformed the Constitution and kept America out of the horrors of the Second World War. So why did the business plot fail? Several factors saved America from this drastic change. First was Smedley Butler's treachery against the plotters. On the surface, he was perfect. A war hero, a critic of the elite, as seen in his 1935 book, War is a Racket, where he called war a scheme for corporate profit. When McGuire approached him, Butler at that time had too much invested in the status quo. He was no longer railing against the government, leaving the bonus army. He was comfortable in the America he lived in, whatever his previous leanings were. His decision to gather evidence and testify was a game changer for the plot. Second, the plotters really misjudged FDR's ideological creep by this time. By 1934, the New Deal was starting to fundamentally reshape America. Programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps and bank reforms were already in place, reducing the appeal of a more radical solution. Third, the conspirators themselves weren't really united. Some, like Clark, hesitated when the plan turned to violence, fearing exposure or backlash. Finally, the McCormack-Dickinson Committee's hearings, though incomplete, brought enough public attention to kill the plot's momentum in the water. The failure preserved America's democracy, but it was considered to be a close call. Imagine a nation where veterans had a significant say in the running of the nation, where powerful men of founding stock informed policy, and where the executive, in form of the General Secretary, was implementing swift autocratic solutions. The legacy of the business plot is both haunting and very overlooked. After the hearings, the story largely faded, dismissed by some as a hoax. The New York Times called it a gigantic hoax, while other papers took Butler's claims very seriously. The lack of prosecutions, McGuire died in 1935 under unclear circumstances, fueled speculation of a big cover-up. The plot's obscurity in mainstream history suggests the elite's influence over what gets remembered, akin to the City of London's financial secrecy. For decades, the business plot was buried, but recent works, like Sally Denton's book, The Plots Against the President, have really revived it in consensus reality. It influenced FDR to double down on the New Deal, setting the stage for how America eventually changed and how America got involved into the meat grinder of the Second World War and became the form that we find it in today. That's about all the information we have on the business plot. It's very interesting because, of course, in the 30s at that time, there was a lot of ideological war going on inside of nations around the world. America was no different on both sides. And the fact that the established elite at this time came up with such a radical solution just goes to show you what lengths people will go to when they're hungry, they can't feed themselves, and their economy is breaking down around them. But that's about all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed it. The Bush family stuff is very interesting in of itself, but this is a part of history I really never hear talked about, so I hope you kind of enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed making it. But if you liked it, subscribe. I'm making new videos all the time now. I'm starting to make them a bit more regularly. So yeah, that's it. I'll see you later.